Local news is shifting faster than ever, and the latest research out of Northwestern's Medill school is kind of proving it. New study out of Chicago shows smartphones have overtaken TV as the go-to source. Content creators are outranking newspapers, and here's the kicker. While most people say they want local news, wait for it, only 15% say they're willing to pay for it. Now, this may not just be about Chicago. Here at EMP, we feel this could be a wake-up call for every newsroom in America and maybe even a roadmap for survival. That's why on this episode of EMP Reports, I am proud and honored to introduce two distinguished guests. First of all, an old friend of EMP Reports, Tim Franklin, Senior Associate Dean at Medill and Director of the Local News Initiative. Tim, you and I, before we started the recording, were trying to remember how many times you've been on the show. You think it's 4 now, am I right?
I think this is 4, yeah. Yeah, it's great to be back.
Like Saturday Night Live, you don't get the jacket till it's 5. I want you to know that. And someone who may end up being on the show more times than Tim, that a new guest, is Stephanie Edgerly. Stephanie, we have you pegged as the Professor and Associate Dean of Research at Medill, a leading national expert on news audiences. Welcome to the program, Stephanie.
Thank you.
This survey of a little over 1,000 Chicago area residents is one of the most comprehensive snapshots of local news behavior we've seen. And because Chicago is a unique mix of cities, suburbs, exurbs, I could go on, rural communities across 3 states, it's really a microcosm of the country. At least we think so. So that's why we'll discuss in the next 20 minutes, could this be kind of a bellwether? Stick around.
Hello. My name is Walter Hussman. Our family has been in the news business for over 100 years. Journalism includes 2 parts, reporting the news and providing opinions. But in recent years, there's been too much opinion appearing in news reporting. This has eroded public trust in news reporting to the lowest level of any U.S. institution. To address this, we started a nonprofit, the Center for Integrity in News Reporting.
The Center for Integrity in News Reporting, CFINR, is on a mission to rebuild public trust in journalism, one newsroom and one classroom at a time. We champion the effort to have news organizations and journalism schools create and prominently display their own clear, concise statements of core journalistic values. Learn more by visiting the Center for Integrity and News Reporting site at cfinr.org.
I don't know where to start, guys. Let's start with smartphones over TV. We'll start with you, Tim. You called this a definite shift. How fast is TV heading down the same path as print in this report? What do you think?
Really fast, like the backstretch of the Indy 500 fast. Local TV is now facing, I think, the same kind of disruption, maybe even a bigger disruption than newspapers faced, 10, 15 years ago. And it's happening for a variety of reasons. Consumers have fragmented to different audiences and to streaming. We've also seen this acceleration of cord cutting. It was only 2 or 3 years ago that there were more paying cable households than non-paying cable households. Now that trend has completely reversed. And cord cutting is really accelerating, and people, are preferring watching television on demand or on streaming services. And then I think we're also seeing what happened in the publishing industry 15, 20 years ago, which is a mass consolidation of the local TV industry. Recently, we've seen the Nexstar Tegna deal being announced, and I think we're going to see more consolidation in the interest of operating efficiencies and so forth. And I think that also could lead, unfortunately, to less local news content as we have more duopolies, and some people are even saying triopolies of local TV news in different markets. And unlike in the newspaper industry, in local TV, there's no history or tradition of paying a subscription for local TV news. I mean, people pay it through their cable bills, but it's not a direct to consumer payment. So the newspaper industry in some ways was better positioned because it was used to asking people to pay for news and information in a way that local TV news is simply not. So this is really a transformational moment, I think, in local TV news.
Stephanie, why are people, especially younger adults, relying so heavily on phones? And what does this mean for newsrooms in general, especially those in print or legacy broadcast?
Yeah, I mean, mobile devices go with you throughout your day, right? You can access all the content you could ever want, and this does include news as well as entertainment when you are on the train, when you are waiting in line, while you are eating lunch. But I think what the big difference is, because I think many of us would say, yeah, I'm pretty glued to my phone also, and it's a pretty key part of how I get information, is that younger people have grown up in a world with mobile devices. They weren't socialized into a world first of print and then of television. So this is really their primary entryway into the communication, news, media world. There's a lot of evidence that by the age of 14, something like 90% of teenagers have access or own a mobile device. And so I think you're really having that strong connection with this way of getting information and not other ways. What that means for news organizations is that you have to understand that you can't just put print content or broadcast content on the web to be consumed on a mobile device and say, hey, I've met you where you are. Here it is. You really have to be prioritizing mobile ready, in some cases, mobile first content that looks and feels appropriate for the device.
All right, so let's go to this part about content creators. First of all, treat me like I'm a 3-year-old, Tim. The survey shows 1/3 of people get daily local news from content creators as opposed from a traditional newsroom. What is a content creator? What does this mean about the future of people's news consumption, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, to me, this was one of the most surprising findings in the survey, was this rise of content creators. So these are folks that are on social media platforms, that are on other platforms like Substack, that are creating content covering their local community, many of them also doing national news as well. But what we see from this audience is that it's now not only possible for individuals to create larger audiences than legacy news organizations, but it's actually happened in many cases. In our survey, there are more folks consuming news from content creators than from legacy newspapers or from legacy radio. And that's just a remarkable turn. So I think this is happening for a lot of reasons. One is I think especially with younger consumers, they're used to consuming news and information through video, not through text. And many of the content creators are creating, short form video clips, whether it's TikTok or Instagram or Facebook or whatever. So it's a more accessible, convenient way for them to get local news and information. And also they're changing the way news is told through different storytelling methods. It's a more conversational, almost authentic mode of storytelling that content creators are doing. And in fact, I think there's a lesson that legacy news organizations can learn from them in doing that. But this is a trend that I think is only going to increase over time, and I think holds some real lessons for legacy news outlets.
Stephanie, in the report, it says 32% of 18 to 29-year-olds consume local news daily. Last year, it was 39. So we've seen a decline. How alarming is this decline? And what does it mean? And what does it mean to the whole news ecosystem and engaging Gen Z today?
Yeah, I mean, the social scientist in me wants to not be too alarmist with, 2 data points and a decline. As I've told Tim, I said, Tim, I think we need to do this survey one more time in the next year. That'll give us 3 data points. And I feel like we can string together a better trend there. So I want to caveat that with saying alarm, but we need more data. I also want to say that young people are always consuming news less than older generations. So in general, that is not alarming. But what we are seeing is some evidence that this current generation of young people are more disengaged with news than young people of yesteryears. And so that I think is really alarming. One of the things that I wrestle with a lot is this how do we re-engage young generations, or is this how do we engage young generations in the first place? And I guess my big message would be that newsrooms face an uphill battle trying to engage young people when they're 18, 24, 28. A lot of these behaviors are already well seated in place. And so my message is really like, you got to start younger, and you oftentimes need to start in middle schools or high schools. And that's where people are developing kind of a relationship with news and local news in particular, and trying to figure out whether that's something that is important in their lives and they need to be consuming.
I want to remind our audience, if you're tripping over this this interview on a podcast platform, come to Editor and Publisher, editorandpublisher.com/vodcasts. We'll offer a complete download. Thank you guys, by the way, of giving this report for free. We'll have the PDF ready. Grab it and look at some of these graphics we're showing on your screen. Here is the big question for me on this show, and we've had many people on this program talking about paywalls. I understand the need for newsroom and journalism as a whole's sustainability struggle. And they talk about the multi-leg stool, Tim, and subscriptions should be part of that stool, that base to support our newsrooms. But the numbers that are coming out are horrid on the percentage of the public we're trying to influence that is willing to pay. This is one of the lowest numbers I've ever seen. Your report shows only 15% of a population will pay for local news. In a society today, Tim, where it's at least, and this might be me editorializing, but it's my show and I can say whatever the hell I want. I mean, in a society today where it's more important than ever that we do our jobs, we hold truth to power. Is that frightening? That we have so many news outlets now generating content behind paywalls where you're showing only 15% are willing to pay to see this content?
Yeah, look, no, that was one of the most troubling numbers that I saw in this report was the 15% willing to pay for local news, and that was actually down from, I think it was 19% in last year's survey, and I've seen it in that general range, but this was the lowest number that I'd seen in a survey on willingness to pay. A couple things, and I don't mean to get too blue sky about this, but we don't really have a mass media anymore. The audiences have fragmented so much that the goal, I think, for a lot of news organizations is to have it's going to be a smaller audience, but to have a dedicated, loyal audience that is willing to pay, and that you're part of their daily lives on a multitude of different platforms. So I don't think that you need the mass scale of paying folks that you needed in the past. Maybe it's a smaller group of paying folks that pay a premium, but that come back to you on a regular basis, and that advertise, and it's an audience that advertisers covet and are willing to invest in your news product for. So that's one thing, and I think we've seen success even with some recent digital startups when it comes to reader revenue. I'm thinking of the Baltimore Banner, for example, in Baltimore, which has been growing and already has a very sizable newsroom. They're doing great. The Daily Memphian in Memphis, I think another great example of a local news organization with a paywall that is succeeding. There's a smaller example, the Johnson County Post in Kansas, in the Kansas City suburbs, started by a husband and wife team. They're doing very good work and are doing well. So I don't think that this means that paywalls don't work, period, full stop. But paywalls are not for every news organization, and so I think what publishers should take away from this is that they need to know their audience. They need to find ways to be in a relationship with their audience, not just a transactional relationship with their audience. And so yes, it's an alarming number. It's one that takes your breath away. But I think it's also a time for reflection and how you raise the revenue to support the local journalism that you need.
Let's shift the conversation to AI. When we do our reporting on this very, very volatile topic, there are people saying that we should ignore it, not use it in our news reporting. Some predict if we don't adapt our newsrooms into using AI as a tool, we will not have the efficiency it creates, thus being able to be scalable, thus being able to compete. Half of your respondents, Stephanie, are uncomfortable with AI-generated news, but many use it in their own worlds. How should newsrooms strike that balance? And maybe this is more editorializing, maybe you don't see it in the numbers, but Stephanie, I'd like to hear your opinion right now on how we should adapt with AI in our own ecosystem.
Yeah, very, very clear communication to your audience about how it's being used. It's not don't use it, but how are you using it? And I would also caveat in saying most people don't understand the work of journalists. And so when you're using AI to do news, they don't really understand what that means. And so part of that clear communication is saying that AI cannot do the work of a journalist. It cannot be the eyes and the ears in local communities. It can't be your voice at neighborhood meetings, but it can help newsrooms do some parts of the news production process. And so I would be very clear with how you're using it, very transparent, so your audience understands how it helps.
All right, we're getting down to our final few minutes of our journey. I'm going to ask the same question of both of you, and I got to pick one to start. And if the other says ditto, I'm sorry. But all right, we'll start with you, Tim. If this survey is a bellwether, I mean, I know, again, let's caveat this. This is a local Chicago survey, but it's a pretty cool ecosystem to survey because you're covering all the different demographies. This could be the bellwether. If it is, what is the single most urgent step you'd like to tell our audience of news publishing executives right now?
I think that this is a historical transformational moment for local news, and that we need to respond to that. That it's time to experiment on different platforms. That it's time to learn from other news providers like content creators, the reasons for their success, the personality and authenticity that they're bringing to a segment of their readership, that they need to not view their audience as customers, but as partners, and bring them into the fold through things like events and email newsletters and maybe Nextdoor and other platforms where they haven't traditionally gone. Now is the moment to try that. Yes, you need to operate more efficiently. AI can help you operate more efficiently in many ways, but it's also a time for finding different ways of storytelling as you try to find that pathway to sustainability.
Stephanie, I hope you don't say ditto, but again, if you, after helping to compile this data and now discussing it with our audience, what do you think is one of the most important takeaways that these news publishers and news media executives should get from this report?
I think there's a lot of concern about young people, and I would just reiterate that connection, building that connection with people starts early, and that's oftentimes before they reach the age of adulthood. And so how can you start creating those points of connection, sharing those ways of telling stories, being in classrooms and local communities, being visible so people understand what local news is. A lot of local news consumption is habit formation. So how do you build the habit of being a regular local news consumer? And I think that starts early, and that starts with, building value among teenagers in a world where they have a lot of other options. And so I would urge your audience to be thinking about local news consumption that predates 18.
The report's called the Medill Survey 2025, How the Chicago Area Gets Its News. But as you've heard in the last 20 minutes, we're really trying to see if this could be something that we all have to look at across our entire ecosystem. Our guest today, Stephanie Edgerly, Professor and Associate Dean of Research at Medill, and of course, Tim Franklin, Senior Associate Dean at Medill and Director of the Local News Initiative. Thanks for your valuable time. Keep us up to date and keep up the hard work. Thanks to both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.